Everyone, my name is Samantha, and I'm here with Bernardo, Amy, Anna, and Dylan to look at the leadership of four CEOs whose companies faced huge crises. Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX, Greg Becker from Silicon Valley Bank, Richard Flewed from Lehman Brothers, and Andrew Mason from Groupon. We'll be focusing on four main things. First, the tone and responsibility each CEO showed when they spoke about their company's failure. Second, the ethics of their leadership, whether their choices were responsible or harmful. Third, how they handled accountability to regulators, investors, and the public. And finally, fourth, the impact their decisions had on the industries, from banking to crypto to startups. By comparing these leaders, we'll see how the way a CEO responds in crisis can affect not just only their company, but public trust and entire industries. Let's get started. So for me, the biggest contrast in tone was between Greg Becker from Silicon Valley Bank and Andrew Mason from Groupon. When Becker spoke at the Senate hearing, he sounded really polished, like he had rehearsed every line. But because of that, it almost felt like he was dodging responsibility in some way. He didn't really address the regular warnings or the stock sales before the collapse, which made him kind of come off as more defensive than accountable. While I saw Mason as kind of the total opposite. In his goodbye letter, he just flat out said he got fired. He even kind of joked about it and admitted he was responsible for Groupon's struggles. It wasn't professional, but it felt really honest and open. So I thought it was interesting. Becker looked serious, but avoided blame, while Mason sounded casual, but he owned up to his mistakes. What do you all think? Does polished professionalism build more trust, or does blunt honesty work better in situations like this?
Now we have two of the CEOs here in Sam Bankman-Fried as well as Richard Fuld. We have Sam Bankman, who was the CEO of FTX at the time they were convicted of fraud, as well as Richard Fuld, who was the CEO of Lehman Brothers when they filed for bankruptcy, looking at some of the roles and responsibilities they took after their companies failed. Starting off, we have Sam Bankman. He did multiple interviews after the company was convicted of fraud. In these interviews, he would say he was advised not to do them, but he felt he owed it to the people. This shows a very apologetic front, where he is seemingly trying to make it up to the people. But in these interviews, he seemed very distant at times and would provide very vague answers, not quite answering questions all the way, which left sometimes more questions than answers, even after he would come out and speak to the public. In these, he even made claims that he was unaware of customer funds being misused by Alameda Research, which left questions as to how both of his own companies were doing this without him knowing. So in this sense, he seemed very apologetic, but at times, people did not know if it was fully true based on what he was saying. Switching over to Richard Fuld, in these, he would accept the blame for what happened with the company, but he would also try and turn the blame when he could. For example, during the House hearing when they were looking into it, he made direct comments saying that he felt let down by the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. So in this sense, he is showing that, yeah, he accepts that it is his fault, but he's also turning the blame, saying he'll take the responsibility, but he's not going to take the responsibility alone, saying the U.S. government let him down and did not support his company the way that it should have, the way he felt that it should have. So in this sense, they both came out and accepted that what they did was wrong. They accepted responsibility, though each of them kind of turned the blame in a way that's a little bit different. Sam Bankman, who came out with FTX, said that he was unaware of many things that were happening inside the company. And then we have Richard Fuld, who turned and said the government did not support him the way it should have, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury.
Hey Dylan, I really liked what you said about Bankman and Fuld. When I looked at Becker from SVB and Mason from Groupon, I noticed some similar patterns in kind of different ways. Becker was like Fuld in the way that he tried to look confident and professional, but it came across as almost avoiding responsibility, especially with all the regulator warnings he avoided. While Mason was almost more like Bankman because his tone was super casual and he was almost joking at times, and that made it seem like he wasn't really taking things seriously and owning up to his mistakes. So across all four of them, you can see the spectrum of either being too defensive or too laid back, and in every case, their tone ended up making the public lose trust in them overall.
So yeah, as Samantha discussed, amongst the CEOs, there's many similarities. There's also some differences. Some of the big similarities between them all is that most of them would accept a moderate degree of blame and would accept that to the public, though at the same time, they would also turn it and try to make it appear as they were not the only ones that were at fault for the companies going downhill. So they would try and blame shift and put it on other people, or perhaps even the U.S. government in some cases. And this is just the way their leadership styles worked and the way they ran their companies. So all the reactions, they had some similarities. Some of them had their differences, such as Samantha said in the previous slide.
Hi, I'm Bernardo, and today I will be discussing the leadership ethics throughout these four CEOs. Let's start with Richard Flewed at Lehman Brothers. He was known for being bold and fiercely loyal to his company, but that confidence turned risky. He kept the company heavily leveraged and used Repo 105 deals to hide around $50 billion in debt. He also passed on possible merger deals that might have saved the company. Those choices played a very major role in the 2008 collapse and the global financial crisis. Next, Sam Bankman of FTX, he built a public image around effective altruism and saying how he wanted to earn money to give it for a good cause. But behind the scenes, he was moving billions of dollars of customer deposits into his trading firm, Alameda, and misleading both investor and regulators. Those hidden moves ended in criminal fraud convictions and one of the biggest bankruptcies ever in the US. Moving with Greg Becker from Silicon Valley Bank, he was very well connected in the tech world and even apologized to Congress after the collapse of the company. But even before the company, was going through the bankruptcy process, he sold millions of stock and lobbied for looser bank rules and failed to protect the bank from the rising interest risks. And those decisions set a stage for the largest U.S. bank failure since 2008. And finally, Andrew Mason from Groupon, he tried to show commitment by dropping his salary to just $1, but he didn't put those financial controls in place, and he allowed aggressive accounting of marketing cost, and he undermined investor trust and eventually cost him his job. Um, Across these four stories, we see the same themes, which is weak transparency, uh, poor risk management, and limited accountability.
Hi, my name is Anna Heath, and I'll be talking about public accountability. The three companies that we're going to be looking at is going to be Lehman Brothers, Groupon, and Silicon Valley Bank. We'll start off with Richard Fuld with Lehman Brothers. He misled investors stating that Lehman's was financially strong, even though they were using accounting tricks such as Repo 105 to hide their leverage. His testimony before Congress said that Lehman's Brothers was a victim of crisis of confidence, and their downfall was essentially due to the 2008 financial tsunami. Lawmakers had criticized him when he took home over 300 million, but he rebutted and said that he also lost money too, but didn't sell his stock. He misled investors and regulators up until the collapse of the company. With Groupon, we have Andrew Mason. During the 60-minute interview, although he was prohibited from discussing the financial discrepancies, he did deflect questions about the internal memo that was leaked, um, and placed financial responsibility on accountants. He also, when this memo was leaked, analysts did deem him as thin skinned. During the case, we also did see that there was restatements and material weaknesses in controls, um, but he did get fired, and at that point, he did admit that he was accountable for those actions. With Greg Becker with Silicon Valley Bank, there was a lack of accountability with stocks, the 30 plus regulatory warnings, and the bonuses distribution. He continued to reassure investors even as stocks were being sold, saying that he was unaware of any trouble or saying it was not material. He also defended the bonuses the company's employees received hours before seizures, saying they were predetermined. When asked to repay the public with his own earnings, he said that he will do as the court advises. He never accepted responsibility, even when asked what he thought about the company's actions in hindsight.
Hi, my name is Amy Gonzalez, and my section focuses on how the CEOs from these four companies, how their leadership decisions impacted the entire industry and not just their own companies. First, with the Lehman Brothers, the CEO took on a lot of debt and used accounting tricks like Repo 105 to make the company look safer than it actually was. When it collapsed in 2008, it pushed the government to create new banking rules like the Dodd Frank Act and the Volcker Rule, which changed how banks handled risk and reported their numbers. With FTX, the CEO didn't keep good controls and used customer money for risky trades. When FTX failed in 2022, it shook people's trust in crypto and sped up efforts around the world to put stricter rules on crypto exchanges to protect investors. For Silicon Valley Bank, the CEO didn't hedge against rising interest rates and had most of the bank's deposits coming from the same type of customers, which led to a huge bank run in 2023. After that, regulators started looking harder at mid-sized banks and talked about tougher rules on liquidity and risk. And with Groupon, the CEO, Andrew Mason, focused on fast growth and used aggressive accounting before the IPO. When the hype faded, investors became more careful about other tech IPOs, making it harder for similar startups to go public. All of these are examples of what CEOs decide can spill over into their whole industry. Their choices can change public trust, investor behavior, and even new rules and regulations.
Hi, Amy. I have to agree with what you mentioned regarding every single CEO. For example, Sam from FTX, the misuse of customer funds and lack of oversight really did shatter the whole trust in crypto. And, every single CEO did fall short in trying to protect their company and their stakeholders. And their late or even partial apologies only made the damage even worse.
I agree with you, Bernardo. I feel like my section on public accountability and your section on ethics go hand in hand to discuss a little bit more on how these CEOs really ran the company, and their lack of accountability and risk management, as you were mentioning. So, with Richard Fold, the fact that he passed on mergers and just kept blaming external factors for the reasoning for his company's downfall without taking that accountability. We also see that with Greg Becker, even though at the very end he did apologize to Congress. During the process, he did sell millions of stocks, as you mentioned. And with Andrew Mason, though he did make himself a $1 salary, right? We do still see that he eventually did get fired, but at least he did hold some sort of accountability. But as they say, too little, too late, right? So I do agree with you on your assessment on these CEOs.
Hey, Anna, I would like to say that I agree with you, and I like how you pointed out that these CEOs often avoid taking real responsibility. And what stood out to me is that when leaders do this, it doesn't just affect their company's reputation, it actually ends up shaking confidence across the whole industry. So, the lack of accountability you mentioned is one reason we see new rules, more oversight, and even more changes in how investors view the entire industry and sectors. And thank you, everyone. This will wrap up our discussion.